Welcome to Motivating Monday. Today I'd like to share a short reflection from the miracle of the feeding of the 5,000. And this is a passage that many of us are familiar with, but it also carries very practical lessons for us today. It is also the only miracle besides the resurrection of Jesus Christ that was recorded in all four gospel accounts, which really shows its significance. And today I'll be referencing the account in Mark chapter 6 verse 30 to 44. And so just to briefly recap what happened. The apostles had just returned from their work and they were tired, and Jesus told them to go to a quiet place to rest. But when they arrived, a large crowd had already gathered. And instead of turning them away, the Bible says that Jesus was moved with compassion in verse 34. And he saw them like sheep without a shepherd. And as it got late, the disciples came to Jesus and basically said, "It's getting late. Maybe you should send them away to find food." But Jesus replied, in verse 37, he says, "You give them something to eat." So you can imagine the disciples being quite shocked, because when they looked at what they had, it was only 5 loaves and 2 fish, and clearly they are not enough. But Jesus took what they had, blessed it, broke it, and gave it to the disciples to distribute. And in the end, not only were 5,000 men fed, everyone ate until they were full, and there were still 12 baskets left over. And so when we read this account, I think there are 5 simple but very encouraging lessons for us. Firstly, we learn that Jesus truly cares about our needs. Before any miracle happened, Jesus already saw the crowd and had compassion on them. And this reminds us that God is never indifferent to our situation. As 1 Peter chapter 5 verse 7 says, "Casting all your care upon him, for he cares for you." And sometimes in life we may feel overlooked, like our struggles are small or unnoticed. But this passage assures us that God sees and he cares. Even before we know how to respond, God already knows our need. And the second thing that we can learn here is that God invites us to trust him in what we cannot solve. Jesus said to the disciples in verse 37, "You give them something to eat." And the disciples immediately focused on their limitations. They knew that they did not have enough to feed everyone. But Jesus was not asking them to have the solution. He was inviting them to trust him. God often places us in situations that are beyond our ability, not because we are sufficient, but so that we would rely on him. Even when we cannot see how things will work out, God calls us to step forward in faith, trusting that he will provide what is needed. And the third thing that we can learn here is that God works through what we surrender and not what we withhold. The disciples had 5 loaves and 2 fish. It was small, but the key moment was not the size, it was the surrender. And the miracle began when the food was placed into Jesus' hands. Hey brethren, we often hold back what we think is too small, like our time, our skills, our energy. But God does not multiply what we keep for ourselves. He multiplies what we place in his hands. And the fourth thing that we can learn from here is that God's provision is not just enough, it is more than sufficient. So as we read from the account, everyone ate and was satisfied, and there were 12 baskets left. And as Ephesians chapter 3 verse 20 says, God is able to do exceedingly abundantly above all that we ask or think. God is not limited to just enough. Even when resources appear insufficient, God's outcome is more than enough. But this does not mean that life is always easy, but it reminds us that God is faithful. He is able to provide beyond what we expect. And the last thing that we can learn here is that God uses ordinary people like us as channels of blessings. An often overlooked part of the story is that Jesus used the disciples to distribute the food. They were not just observers, they became participants in the miracle. And so in the same way, God still uses us today. We may think that we are not significant enough, but God can use our actions to impact others in ways that we may never fully see. God doesn't just work for us, he works through us to meet the needs of others. And sometimes we may even be the loaves and fish in someone else's life. And so in conclusion, as we reflect on this miracle, there are a few simple truths that we can learn. God sees our needs. God invites us to trust him in what is beyond us. God multiplies what we surrender. God provides abundantly. And God chooses to work through people like us. And so, brethren, as we go through our daily lives, may we remember this. Even if what we have seems small, nothing is small when it's placed in the hands of God. And as we offer what we have to Him, He is able to use it beyond what we can imagine.
Holy